how did this book come to be?
Well, it's not a memoir. It's a story. It's Chris's one of his favorite stories. He's a great storyteller. One of his favorite stories, and there's sadness to it because it's about his grandfather, his beloved grandfather, who lost his life at 61 years old. And there are a couple of things that the number 61 becomes important, starting with his grandfather's age, and Chris scoring 61 points in an important high school game in his life, really the most important one probably, as his grandfather was losing his life in a murder with a very complicated case. But it's really an ode, it's tribute to his grandfather all these years later, and teaches us a lot about when people mourn and how they mourn, and you don't need to do it in a certain time, and everybody does it in their own way.
Right.
And Chris wanted to pay tribute. This has nothing to do with the season. It has nothing to do with getting traded. It has nothing to do with going to the finals 2 years ago. It's Chris Paul, great storyteller, telling a story that's very much worth investing in. And he asked me years ago, he started talking about it and thinking about it to help him shape it. And that's what I do. This is not my story. This is Chris's story. I am honored that he asked me to help facilitate it, and that's what I did.
As you're going through this, I mean, it's life lessons from Papa, and I don't want to give away the book. People need to read the book. But as he's pulling the onion back, did you have any idea of the depth that you would be walking into in being a part of this project?
Not exactly. And I say not exactly in that I had hints. I've known Chris a long time. I've known Chris more than half his life, since he was 18 years old. And so he and his brother CJ, who are just two of my favorite people, having nothing to do with sports. And I know their story and their family. And I knew parts of the story of their grandfather because it played out in real time in the news. Right. I did not live in North Carolina, so I did not follow it on a daily basis, but I knew parts of it. And of course, as you peel back, and that's exactly the phrase that would describe the process, you realize what he meant to Chris and CJ, to their whole family, and what family means to them. And so, no, I didn't know that yet. I think many of us, one of the great lessons here is most of us have someone like this in our family. I know I did. I had an uncle who was very much like Chris's grandfather, and we talked about that in our meetings and our sessions to just talk about what led to this storytelling. My uncle owned a grocery store on the south side of Chicago, and going there for me as a young boy and a teenager was very much like Chris going to the gas station that his grandfather owned. Very, 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 very much. And so, yes, I got the depth of it. And I think that was sort of a connection that we have, in addition to having nothing to do with basketball and me
Right.
covering the NBA all these years and me knowing Chris. I think that connection had a lot to do with my affection for this story.
Were there moments where you had to say, look, this has got to be in the book? Or because sometimes books will keep this out, and this, especially the death of Papa, was very graphic and very moving, emotionally moving as I was reading it. And were there those moments?
No, there weren't. I'm very lucky as somebody who used to be, and maybe occasionally still is, in that there are only two people I've edited their books. Both times they said, hey, we want you involved in this. Those two people are Charles Barkley and Chris Paul. And people know Charles is a great storyteller, and there's a certain way that Charles can tell any story, and most of it involves his own brand of humor. People don't associate that. They don't know Chris quite as well yet as a public figure. Chris is every bit the storyteller Charles is. And I say that, again, gratefully, as someone who was involved in the telling of two books with Charles that I edited, and now one with Chris. And no, I didn't have to say, oh, yeah, let me convince you to use this. No.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, the day before, and part of this, we started these conversations during COVID. So some of this is on Zoom, even though both of us might have been in Arizona. And the day that I wanted to really get into the murder and the details of his grandfather, I thought I was going to have to convince him of some of it, and I had to convince him of nothing. He understood that to tell this story properly and to give it the proper treatment that he wanted to, not me, that it was going to all have to be out there to be consumed. It's very hard. It's very emotional, but he held it together. I'm sure on the inside, maybe not, but I was fascinated by that. I was amazed by it, to be honest.
You know, the book is called 61 Life Lessons from Papa on and Off the Court. Chris Paul with Michael Wilbon. Michael joins us here for a couple of minutes. It is out, and definitely something that you will not be able to put down on your summer reads. Skip Prosser. I'm going to throw a couple of names at you there in the book. Skip Prosser. What does Skip Prosser mean to Chris Paul?
Well, all of the people who were in that sort of coaching lineage meant something. And at Wake, you know, it's coming of age. And so that part of it might not be particularly different if you're talking about any player and the influences and the influences outside family. And, you know, when you play basketball this long, this well at this level, as Chris had, you're coached. It's interesting because now I will hear iconic players, some of the most famous ones ever, talk about, complain to me, so-and-so's not coachable. And Chris loves coaching, loves good coaching. I always ask him, you know, and during this process, I'm like, you got to coach. And he goes, no, I don't have to coach. But the coaches in his life who had great influence, you know, I mean, they're akin to family members, right? Father, grandfather, and uncles. And Skip is certainly in that line of people that had great influence and that Chris reveres.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw the NBA GM survey that had Chris as the most likely to be a head coach someday.
I did not see that. It does not surprise me.
Yeah. It was last season, and I brought it up on my show. And of course, when Monty left, it was, is this the time? But then, of course, the deal happened. His mom coached him in a YMCA team in 8th grade. I thought that was cool. And that's about as far as I'm going to go into the book, other than say, you need to buy it, because there's all these great stories that Michael was able to get from Chris. And I hate doing book interviews and giving away the whole book, and people say, well, I don't need to go get it now.
I don't need to read it now. I'm glad. It's good. It's a good tease you just did, a professional job of teasing. So I appreciate that, and I think I can speak for Chris and say he would appreciate it too.
When the trade happened, let's move over to that. What did you think?
I was annoyed because I liked Chris being here. I mean, I'm in Arizona a big chunk of my life now. Yep. Certainly since he was traded here, even a bigger chunk during the pandemic, and my family spending more time in Arizona than ever, and Chris being here, me able to go down to see him, take my son. My son's a young basketball player, a year older than Chris's son. He's a point guard in high school now, and I know who I want him to see as a role model from a basketball sense and from a personal sense. There are people I don't want, and there are people I do, and Chris Paul's somebody I do. And so Matthew's been able to sit in on a few sessions in his life with Chris. And so I loved that. I loved it. I wanted him to be the person who got the Suns all the way through. And he got him damn close.
Yeah.
And so I'm annoyed. I'm glad he wound up with Golden State. I'm really happy he wound up with Golden State if he's not going to be here with the Suns. So
some people think he's not going to stay at Golden State. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I find that hard to believe. What do you make out of Bradley Beal? You've seen Bradley Beal, I'm sure, through the years. What do you think of this mixture now with the Suns adding Bradley Beal, Michael?
Yeah. My primary home's in a place called Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of Bradley Beal since the beginning. He's a terrific talent and a terrific player. And from all I know, easy to get along with. Seems like he'll be a perfect fit with Book and KD and whoever else is on the roster. It's interesting. I don't see Devin Booker or Bradley Beal as a traditional point guard. I'm old. I'm a traditionalist when it comes to basketball. I like a Chris Paul running my team. You know, that's what I'm somebody who believes in that. But I also know that, you know, the Chicago Bulls, the great teams that are my favorite teams of my life, being a native Chicagoan, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen weren't traditional point guards, but they held down the fort, didn't they? They got the job done more times than not. And so I'm looking at this in a non-traditional way and like, okay, can these guys exist in this form? Who's going to organize the team? Who's going to be that person taking charge? Who can you count on late in games? All of those things that we assign to traditional point guards like Chris Paul, can Bradley Beal and Devin Booker do that? And Kevin Durant. So I'm interested to see it. I'm interested to see it. Bradley Beal can score 30 points a game. You got three guys on the court who can score 90 in a game. But what does it mean? Is there enough there? Is there enough there? Is it the right mix? Are they going to share and not take turns? There's some teams with great players who just take turns. That's not going to win a championship. And I think that with Devin, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant, you've got guys who are just great teammates. And that's the starting point for any sort of great team. But do you have enough there for them to get that next step further? They got to go through Denver. Everything goes through Denver now. Right. Well, the Suns took Denver further than anybody last year. They got 2 games off of them. Minnesota only got 1. The Lakers got none. And the Celtics got 1. The Suns played the Nuggets tougher than anybody last year. But can they take that a step further?
I'll let you go off that. I appreciate your time. And again, the book is out, 61 Life Lessons from Papa on and off the court. Chris Paul with the great Michael Wilbon. We appreciate your time, Michael.
Thank you.
Right back at you, right?
I got a copy wherever I go as well. Much appreciated. Thank you for having me.
And we're back with more after this timeout.